Okay. Dear friends, welcome to our event today, which is co-organized by Volt Belgium and Yanis Karamitsos. My name, for those that don't know me, it's Katerina Serifi. I'm Greek, living consecutively 17 years now in Brussels. I consider this town as my hometown, and I'm working for the ESC European Economic and Social Committee and the press unit, and I'm optimistic European. Today's discussion, it's about the Conference of the Future of Europe. We will try to see where we stand now, just a year before the European elections, and whether there are lessons to take from this exercise. I'm delighted to present you the panelist. It's Mr. Daniel Freud from. I'm sorry for the pronunciation of the names. You should be used for this, as Timmermans said, with the bad English. Member of the European Parliament and of the group of the Greens is Joanna Lund. So, Luke. Thank you. I'm sorry, Joanna. Which is the co-president of the Volt Belgium. Next to Joanna, it's Omni Praise from the managing director of the Alliance for Europe. And then we have Yanis Karamitsos. Thank you so much, Yanis, the author of the book. I thought that you have seen the book, and Active Federalist. I will give you, to each one of you, 7 minutes to start with your statement. Just before that, I would like to know that to say a few things about how I feel for this, for the situation today, before I give you the floor. So I would like to express my personal satisfactions that the proposals for the future of Europe move in the directions of more Europe and its integration. The poly-crisis we are facing, and we faced, and we are still facing. I mean, all of us, we know a pandemic, Russian invasion in Ukraine, the climate crisis, the rise of authoritarian regimes, the challenges of artificial intelligence, and more issues. We saw that we cannot tackle them efficiently if we are acting as a single state or single actors. So 1 year before the European election, is this more Europe the right direction to go? Daniel, you have 7 minutes to start your statement. Yeah.
I would say yes, obviously. Well, I come from Aachen. I have grown up right next to lots of borders with Belgium and the Netherlands. I have actually, from almost from birth, I went to Crèche on the Belgian side of the border. I'm part of those that had the pleasure of doing an Erasmus exchange, went to Paris for a year, met my Italian wife. So obviously, I think that Europe is great. It gives us incredible personal freedoms that I'm sure everyone here in the room enjoys. But I also think that it is the space where we can tackle the big challenges of our time. If you take something like climate change, coming from the biggest member state of the EU or the most populous one, if Germany goes climate neutral tomorrow, we haven't stopped climate change. But if the entire European Union, the biggest market in the world, goes climate neutral, then I think we have leverage on this planet. And it goes for, whether large corporations pay at least a little bit of taxes on the profits they make in the Union. And I think since the 24th of February last year, we have also all discovered that war has come back to this continent in a way that many thought was history, but now it's back. And I think since then we see very clearly, if Putin wants to incapacitate the European Union, he needs one. He needs one person at the table of the European summit, and then we no longer have an opinion on war crimes in Ukraine. So the way that our current union is structured, the voting by unanimity on foreign policy, on sanctions, is a security risk for the European Union. So obviously, we need to address those challenges. There's lots of challenges, and we have seen crisis after crisis in the last decade, from migration over COVID, Brexit, and now the war. And I think it's time that we draw the lessons from those, make sure that the union is better able to respond to these crises, maybe even to be able to tackle two crises at the same time for once, so that we can catch up with all the stuff that's happening around us. So for a long time, I mean, I've been in Brussels for a while. For a long time, when you said, you know, I'm a convinced federalist, I think we need to open the treaties, we need to change some of these fundamental things in the union to be able to better work together. People looked at you and thought you're a bit crazy, right? The traumatic experience of the referenda on the constitution in France and the Netherlands for a long time made everyone say, yeah, we're not doing that again. And I think something changed with the last European elections. It gave us the opportunity, you know, to take that tiny idea that was there about a conference and try to make something of it. I wouldn't call the conference a resounding success, but I'd say it gave us an opportunity to spark something. And at least it was successful enough that now, for the first time in the history of the Union, we're launching treaty change from within the European Parliament. So I'm one of the rapporteurs on that file. We're still working on it. It was an interesting experience of discussing basically the treaties from A to Z, really going article by article, and you know, talking about how can we improve the functioning of the Commission? How can we make it a real European government? How can we make sure that democratic control works in all its aspects? How, you know, there's the obvious one of getting rid of unanimity, but obviously it opens the question, what can we do with the voting in the council to make it maybe a little bit easier for the member states, well, to give up their vetoes? And we have lots of ideas on that, and we also have reasonably broad agreement. I mean, the final deal is not done yet, but what's shaping up there is that there will be a deal among the 5 democratic, somewhat pro-European groups in the parliament, so from the EPP to the GUE, and I think we will vote that in parliament in the coming month, and then it will be up to the member states. And interestingly enough, the threshold to actually call a convention is one of the lowest majorities that we have for anything. I mean, the only spot really in the treaty where it's a simple majority is for calling a convention. So all we need is 14 member states to say yes. And I think on this, we have seen change in the last years. I'm pretty convinced that 2 years ago, if you would have asked in the council on the other side of the street, sort of who's in favor of opening the treaties, I don't know if you would have found one. Maybe Macron, I'm not sure. Today, I think we are at about half the member states. You know, when the Greens entered the German government, we made sure that it's in the coalition treaty that we want to do this. And lots of other governments have also realized that this is necessary. Some of you might know that I work a lot on stopping Viktor Orban not only destroying Hungary, but the union. I have to admit that he has maybe been the strongest campaigner for abolishing unanimity over the last few months. No one has used the veto more than him. He's going on everyone's nerve. And more member states are understanding that this is not a way that we can continue working together in the union. So I would think that there is an opening, and I think we all need to make that an issue around the European elections to show that there is that there is citizen support for this as well. And then I think there is a chance for such a fundamental reform that we all need.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Daniel. You keep the time. Joanna, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Katharina, and thank you very much, Daniel. So I think I want to start this with a question. Who of you has participated in the Conference for the Future of Europe? Okay, we do have actually a couple of hands. But how many of you do actually know what the outcomes are, what the implementation process will look like? A couple of hands as well. I think, yes. So, I mean, obviously no shame here. I didn't raise my hand as well. I did follow, of course, what the conference, what the result of the conference were. But I think we're touching here on something very symptomatic of how the EU works in general. There is a very small understanding for what precisely is awaited from this conference. Now, I think it's an amazing opportunity, an amazing process that was instaured, I would say not by the citizens, but actually by the institutions. It is something that has been initiated. I mean, Macron was behind it. Von der Leyen backed it up at the beginning of her mandate. So we do observe a change in the way that the European institutions want to involve citizens into the decision-making process. And actually the response of citizens is also very positive. If we look at the Eurobarometer just before the launch of the conference, we see that actually 3/4 of Europeans were in favor or thought that this was a good step into re-energizing the European democracy. Now, if we look closer at those numbers, we see that only half of people actually feel they wanted or want to participate. And half of Europeans is still not enough. Now, if we look even closer to who those 50% are, there are huge discrepancies in the enthusiasm rate between the different European countries. So we have Ireland with about 80% of respondents who said, yes, I really want to take part in this conference. And then on the other side of the spectrum, we had Bulgaria and Portugal, who both scored around a third of respondents. So that's not a lot. I think what is positive, though, is that we want to instaure a European-wide, a pan-European conversation on a shared future. Now, I think what's very important to keep in mind is that if we do a reality check today, not all Europeans benefit from the same rights. So to share a little anecdote, I just came back yesterday from Romania, where Volt Europe, so the European party of Volt, had its general assembly, and we talked about also our aspirations for, of course, the European elections, but also for the next 40 years and what we see in terms of, for example, citizen empowerment. And many of us came from countries like the Netherlands, Germany, Belgium, Greece, and I think it was for all of us a reality check to actually have to go through a border check, a border control at the Romanian border. And we did participate in a demonstration on the streets in Bucharest to support the accession of Romania and Bulgaria into the Schengen area. So, well, it was vetoed by countries like the Netherlands and Austria for also local political reasons. And I think all this shows that it is good that we talk about the future of Europe, but we have to talk also about what should be improved today. In terms of the way the conference was thought is very institutional. So, I mean, I'm being very negative here, but it's also very positive. I do really congratulate the institutions of taking this into their hands. But how can we make sure that this way of involving citizens into the decision-making process is not a one-time occurrence, but actually helps to create bridges to put the European citizen into the front to create the policies for a shared European future. Now, there's obviously one side that we should, I think, focus on, and that goes beyond focusing on elections, but is how can we make sure that the European citizen is also informed on the way the institutions work. Compared to the United States, we see that there is a very small understanding of the treaties, the European treaties, how, if you compare it to the USA, I think citizens might be informed about what the impeachment procedure is, but barely anyone, I think, remembers Article 50 of the Treaty of the European Union, which triggered Brexit. So we do have to also focus on making sure that the conversations that need to result out of this conference are also taken by the media, taken on a day-to-day level. Why isn't the media communicating more about this? Why don't we hear about the outcomes of the conference on the future of Europe on a systematic basis? Why, if I watch the German television, I barely see anything about it? And I think this is something that will need to happen to make sure that the trust that citizens have put into the conference for the future of Europe remains, because there's nothing worse than to fail on management expectations. So there's also a study lately that has been published by the Free University of Brussels that showed that citizen panels or citizen panels, if the results of these panels are not enforced, if they are not taken seriously, then it might actually backlash even more. So we have to, I think the institutions have to make sure that what has been asked by the citizens is also implemented. We'll see with the council, of course, but this is something that really, really is the key message here. How can we make sure that those policies that we put forward are something we can promise and something we can deliver on? Voilà, so I think I'll wrap it up here. I'm also very interested in hearing what you think, what your impressions are of the conference for the future of Europe. But I think it's still important to fight every day for those ideas and keep this conversation open, but also keep this conversation flowing beyond the Brussels bubble, which we are all here a part of. We have to make sure that it reaches every citizen in every member state and up to the periphery of the Union.
Thanks a lot, Johanna. Omri, you have the floor.
Thanks a lot, and it's a pleasure to be here on this very nice sunny afternoon. It's good of everybody to be sitting inside. For this, I'll try and make it as entertaining as possible. But maybe just to start with this relationship to borders, just we each kind of situate ourselves. And essentially, I was born in Israel, where all the borders are just taken to be closed kind of by default. Even if you can get through them, it's very difficult. And that's sort of like the entire feeling that pervades the country. It's very much this closed border environment. Where war is imminent, and moving to Europe as a child really opened up my eyes to the fact that there is a different normality, and it's something that has made me interested in this kind of field. And also, I think something that we should be thinking about when we are having this conversation is this sense of what is plausible, what is normal, what is possible. And if you've ever studied political science, there is this concept of the Overton Window. And we are in the Brussels bubble now. We are talking to people on average who probably will have come across some political science, so delving into that. But essentially the idea of the Overton window is this idea that policy ideas become, they go from being radical and fantastical and outrageous, and they gradually enter the mainstream. They become plausible, then they become the obvious thing to do, and then they become old-fashioned and outdated and reactionary. And what we're trying to do when we're talking about the future of Europe and moving towards this more united, more diverse, more sustainable, more inclusive Europe is essentially shifting the Overton window from our perspective on these ideas. Now, we have to really be aware of the fact that we have another side to this political debate of authoritarian, reactionary political forces centered around people like Putin or Trump or others who are trying to move the Overton window in the other direction. So a nationalist Europe that is broken up into national states that are white, that are dominated by rich, powerful men and who are straight and nothing else. And as we've entered this very weird reality where, you know, Brexit happened, Trump became president, and all of this, we now live in a world where a lot of things that we thought were impossible have become possible. And then, you know, and then apparently they've discovered aliens, there are robots coming and all of this. So the world becomes increasingly weirder and weirder, but we need to be very aware that we're shifting what's plausible one way and another. And so with Alliance for Europe, what we try and do is identify who are the people that we need to activate in order to achieve the change that we need to get to. So who are the communities that we need to connect? Who are the people that we need to activate? What is the campaign that we need to run? And so the Conference on the Future of Europe essentially did achieve some very interesting things. The reason that everybody is confused about the outcomes, the process, etc., is because there was a very strong political interest in making it as confusing as possible, because the politicians at the national level did not want anybody to hold them to account to some wild promises that they didn't feel like wanting to keep. And so despite the fact that a lot of you know, great members of parliament got together, moved the needle, did a lot of great work, a lot of civil society organizations, a lot of citizens participating, there was always this massive fuzziness around the conference because there was this political interest in ambiguity. However, because we had all of these opinion leaders and decision makers in one room from all these different places, we did get some very significant changes made that Daniel described, including moving the Overton window on this issue of abolishing the veto. And that went from, you know, some fantastical pie-in-the-sky idea to something that's plausible and realistically on the table now. And that's something that, you know, a group of civil society campaigners and opinion leaders, including Daniel and the Volt campaigners and others, made possible, essentially. And now the question is, where do we go from here? Who are the people that we really need to activate in order to go to the next phase? So, you know, the institutions did achieve a lot by having the conference with citizen participation and all of that, and then beyond that, committing to citizen panels on key EU decisions. But they didn't do it out of the goodness of their own hearts. They did it because a group of civil society organizations like Citizens Take Over Europe, like the No Veto campaign partners, really pushed and pushed and pushed and got these ideas across the line and got them implemented. And so now I think, you know, Daniel, you made the point of we need to you know, send it over to the member states. Well, how do we influence the political agenda of the member states? That's the key question here. We now have this snap election that was called in Spain. Spain will have the presidency of the council coming up. This is another example of a social democratic government kind of being thrown into upheaval, as seems to be a trend in recent years. And the question is, what do we do in order to make sure that enough Spanish people with pro-European views go out to vote? What do we do to change the narrative so that there is some significance to this pro-European agenda in Spain? And how can we, you know, protect the information ecosystem in Spain from disinformation and interference, and really do some very specific, concrete, tangible things to make sure that that election is protected, let's say, and then connecting that to the political discourse in Europe, and then, you know, beyond that, the Belgian presidency, and beyond that, which are the member states that are really going to drive the conversation. So I think that's really, you know, the key political question that we need to be asking ourselves as we go from A to B on this process of the future of Europe, and then feeding that into the European elections that are coming up as well, where we can really use the momentum around the European elections campaign to drive some of these points home. So maybe I'll stop here and I'll pass it on. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Yanis, you have the floor now for 7 minutes.
Thank you. It's working. It's on. Thank you, Katerina. I'm Yannis Karamitsos. I come from Greece, but I live several years already here in Brussels, working for the European Commission. I'm an active federalist, member of several groups, and what I have done recently, actually beginning of next year, was to write and publish a book with the title Time for a European Federation. I think it's quite self-explanatory as a title, that it actually proposes that we switch and we move from the current state of a union of sovereign states into becoming altogether a sovereign federal republic. Something like the United States of America. You can call it United States of Europe, or you can find any other fancy name. What is the main reason? The main reason is that after having seen all the developments, especially since the financial crisis of 2008 until today, which is already 15 years, I'm more and more convinced that we cannot continue the way we are in the institutional form that we are right now. I believe that the current structure of many tiny member states sticking together, keeping many competencies for themselves, and not having a strong united voice to compete with the rest of the world, I believe that this structure is already outdated. History is accelerating and cannot wait for us. We are still too weak ourselves as Europe to confront Putin alone. We're still too weak alone to compete with the rise of authoritarian regimes and powers like China. Alone we are still weak in order to address issues like the climate crisis and artificial intelligence. The book identifies 5 existential risks that we face right now as Europeans. One is that compared to the rest of the world, we are in economic decline. Second, demographically, we are stagnated. We will remain only 500 million people maximum by the end of the century, while the rest of the world will jump from 7.5 to 9 billion people. We run the risk of food security because of the climate crisis. We are still food dependent on the rest of the world. We run the risk of energy insecurity, and this has been clearly evident due to the recent Russian aggression. And fifth, and maybe the most important, we run the risk of staying behind in the global competition of advanced technologies and artificial intelligence. The big developments, the big novelties in the world today occur in the west coast of the United States or in East Asia. We in Europe, we need to catch up. So, is this something realistic? Is this proposal realistic? The book argues, and I think we can also see it with our eyes, that we are already federated 60 or 70%. It's not a process that needs to start from scratch. Already 60% of national legislation is transposition of European legislation. We already use common passports with a common EU flag. Of course, unfortunately, with the exception of Bulgaria and Romania, who still don't have access to Schengen. However, the unthinkable, if you think that this process would be unthinkable, I have to highlight the fact that it's already several unthinkable positive and negative developments have happened. Brexit was unthinkable, and it happened in 2016. The pandemic itself was unthinkable. It happened in 2020 and locked in billions of people around the world exactly in the same way. In 2020, because of the pandemic, another unthinkable thing happened. We all together, as Europeans, borrowed with the same interest rate under a Eurobond, 750 billion euros as an entity altogether in order to finance the recovery from the pandemic. We ordered altogether vaccines for COVID, something unprecedented. We started talking about a common European health policy, something unprecedented until then. And then the other unthinkable happened, the Russian aggression against Ukraine, and since then we started talking seriously about going for a common army. Another thing, and then here I would also like to hear the comment of Mr. Freund. I realized that when the German coalition government was formed at the end of 2021, in page 113 of the coalition agreement, it was clearly stated as a goal of the German new government, the creation of a federal European Republic. Is something like they have written my book or read my book, or they could themselves write this book. And for me, that was really the most unthinkable thing. If the biggest sovereign nation, the strongest sovereign nation in Europe itself proclaims, as a vision at least, the creation of such a European Federal Republic, what holds the rest of us to at least start discussing about it? To conclude, I think it's still possible. The Conference on the Future of Europe, of course, has been much more modest. Its conclusion really moves to a federalist direction because they propose that at least the veto, the national veto in the Council, will be abolished when we speak about foreign relations, when we speak about imposing sanctions on other countries, when we speak about taxation. If the national veto is abolished in the Council, and the Parliament has already endorsed this conclusion of the Conference on the Future of Europe, then the road opens at least to get federated in our foreign policy. It's a small but very significant step. And of course, it can create a momentum, a dynamic, whereby many other steps in the same direction can also take place, especially if we open finally the discussion about the treaty change. Just to remind everybody that we had frequently treaty changes between 85 and 2009. It's already 14 years without any change in the treaty. Time has come, not only because we want it, not because there is a politician planner behind this idea, because reality, because life itself is forcing Europe to unite into a more federated structure. I will stop here, and of course we can continue with this discussion following also your questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Yanis. I mean, feel free to ask questions on whatever moment the question comes to you. You should just, I mean, it will be polite to present yourself if you want. And yes, please. And yes, I'll take the question from the lady. Firstly, yeah.
Sorry, just do I need a microphone now? My name's Sandra from Keeping Channels Open, a new dialogue network. I'm British, obviously. So a couple of questions. One on the Conference on the Future of Europe. I would suggest that the name itself is a bit too formalistic and kind of puts you off. It should have been a little bit more buzzy about it. And it obviously should be conceived as a long process because it's a conversation that needs to start and continue, you know, and reach into all the parts, as you already said. I don't know if I could have taken part as a British person, maybe yes, no, I don't know. But so that's just one point. And the second on Yanis's proposal, I suppose coming from Britain, I know this now, that the amount of Eurosceptics out there, I just think that going too fast, too quickly, might alienate people and be a bit divisive, and that there's an advantage to having a big umbrella that includes people who don't really want to get too close, because then we're going to be split down the middle again, and I've seen that in my country, of course, now. So.
Yeah, I will. Yeah, I mean, Daniel, you can start. I mean, we have already challenged by Yanis of Nel Casey, so yeah.
I mean, on the last point you made, this question, are we going too fast, and is that alienating people? I actually think the opposite. If you look at something like the euro, I think for economists it was always clear, if you do a currency, you need to do economic, social, taxation together. You know, otherwise it doesn't work. If you just do the currency, you're going to run into crises. So when Mitterrand and Kohl decided on the euro, they didn't have the strength to immediately integrate all these other things that they needed to integrate. And their thinking was, we'll get there eventually. The crisis came first. We all paid the price. Lots of young people all over Europe lost a decade, some more, of very economic hardship because we didn't go fast enough. I'd say we drew the lesson a bit, and it was said that after the economic slump of Corona, we responded differently. We didn't try to answer an economic downturn with austerity, making it even worse. So for the first time, we invested. But it took us a long time to learn and to realize, in a way, what economists had been telling us since the 70s, at least. So I'm not convinced of this whole, if we go too fast, we're alienating people. I think ultimately what alienates people is if we're not solving their issues. If people have certain fears, if people have certain economic conditions that they don't like, that is what alienates them. But I actually think that the union is not in a shape right now to respond to some of the big challenges of our time. So I actually think we would get, more trust and more recognition from people if we went a bit faster and actually delivered on what people want to see from the union.
As long as you can handle the communications and the disinformation that's going to come with that. Because we couldn't in Britain, and that's why we're out. So you just have to be sure you can do it.
Yeah.
Does anyone else wants to reply to this? Okay.
Yes, so I think just on the point of the name of the conference, I think most names for projects in the EU and in many government structures, you do need a buzz committee that doesn't get convened. A lot of the naming is not very innovative, but I think there was a desire to create some kind of formalistic structure that would take us, forward in some recognizable way. So you couldn't call it a convention; you had to call it a conference. And I think, indeed, as Daniel was saying, a lot of the time, we on the pro-democratic side of the argument, I would say, have forgotten that politics is also about persuasion. We also need to go out and actually engage our audience to shift opinions. And this is something that the Brexiteers knew very clearly, and they started campaigning to exit the European Union the moment that the UK went in. So they never minced their words about it, and they were a bunch of kooks on the fringes for many, many years, and gradually kind of pried their way into the mainstream. And I think we need to learn from the audacity of that, from the fact that they didn't mince their words and said, we stand for freedom and for rights and for sovereignty and for you and for, for your life. And for a long time, a lot of pro-Europeans in the UK and elsewhere said, well, they're giving you freedom, we're giving you no roaming charges. Okay, roaming charges versus freedom, it was a strange, it was an imbalance there. In the end, it turns out that the Brexiteers didn't deliver freedom for anybody, they didn't deliver sovereignty for anyone. If we want sovereignty, we need a federated Europe, because member states no longer have any sovereignty, they no longer have any control of their own affairs, because the problems are global. But we need to make that argument. We need to make people feel those arguments, and we need to know who we're talking about, because and who we're talking to, because our audience has different interests, different levels of relationship to these issues, and we need to engage people where they're at, essentially.
Well, thanks for this question. I think it's what we all ask ourselves. I think, especially when we do politics, when we do European politics, this question always comes up. Like, okay, what? Is it too much? Should we what is federalism? And I think the concept of European federalism is, in my opinion, is not very well understood. So, when we pledge for a European federation, it means it's not just to become a country. Okay, great, but what is behind that? The first step is more cooperation, and I think this is also really the essence of your book. It's really what is behind that. We throw big concepts out there, and then we expect people to understand them and to figure out that European Federation means no veto. Yeah, but what is a veto? How does it work? When do I use a veto? These are all things that, as I said before, are just not enough and not well understood. And I think also what's important, and Omri, you mentioned it, this emotion. when we look at political discourse, roughly said it will be pro-European or anti-European. But if I say I'm a pro-European, what do I mean? What is the emotional discourse behind it? So, I mean, to share some insights with Volt, we're developing right now our narrative for the European elections. So, what message, what deeper message, what emotions do we want to target of people so that they say, okay, actually, yeah, it makes sense. We need to look at issues on a pan-European level. So, we have to do politics beyond borders. So, we're thinking about this, and I think it is an extremely hard exercise, and that's really also what the whole also conference on the future of Europe is about. There's no one single answer. It's always black. I mean, there's black and white. There's so much nuance. It is a lot of institutional knowledge, also a lot of institutional matters behind. But roughly say we have to move away from saying, okay, if we want to have more Europe, it means that you're going to lose what you already have. So we don't want federated Europe so that you're not German anymore. That doesn't make sense. It's not what we want. And this is really what anti-Europeans will play with those fears that, oh, you're going to lose a part of your identity as well. So overall, I mean, I think in the perspective of political parties, we have to play a big role in selling a message that is understandable. So really, what is behind that? Explaining with simple words, difficult concepts, but also create this interest in the citizen to get informed, to follow up on what's actually needed for a better Europe, not more Europe or not less Europe, but for a better Europe. So we have to meet each other halfway.
Thank you, Joanna. You got a question, yeah.
Yes, hello, I'm Giorgio Clarotti, so I'm a European Federalist for a long time, one of the founders of Alliance for Europe, and since January a member of Volt Belgium, so very happy to meet you all, a long time from of Janis. The question goes to Daniel and Joanna. I think the elections coming are really the place where to put to citizens the fact that we need a change in the treaty if we want to achieve things. You have made examples of why getting rid of the veto is an issue. And there we have, simplifying a lot, two options. The simpler thing to explain, which is we need to abolish veto, which in the end means qualified majority voting, which means federalism. Or we need a convention to change the treaties overall. So the question is, do you agree of the fact that the change of the treaty has to be in the ballot? Because if a majority of parties who want this win the elections, then there is a pressure with respect to member states who for the moment are not too hot about the reform. And then what do you think about a minimalist approach, easier to understand, or a more complex one, which is, again, it's the level of ambition. I mean, you can be, is it possible to campaign on a convention and saying we need a convention to do the treaties, etc., etc.? Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
I do think that the European election can play an important role in this discussion. How many voters that are maybe not, long-time federalists, or that you find in this room, can you convince at the end of the day, vote green, then you get a convention, you get a European Federal Republic? I don't fully know. We had our party congress where we did the endorsements for the European election just last week. I ran on that on the party internal campaign and did get elected. So it's, I mean, some people you can convince with this. How much when we go sort of out to the external campaign on the market squares, in the debates among the political parties. Let's see. I think for a general audience, I would think, you have to explain a little what is it that we want to do. If let's think about that horrible scenario that we get some crazy Republican in the White House again in early 25. I don't want the Ukraine to die over a weird electoral decision that is taken somewhere in Georgia or the other swing states that are going to determine that, right? So I want the European Union to be in a capacity to provide the necessary support to Ukraine. And for that, we need to change things. We need to do procurement together. We need to improve the EU defense structures. We can discuss about an EU army. I think, lots of steps to be taken in between that. All that requires treaty change. And I think ultimately, for many people out there, it's easier to understand if you tell them, look, I want that Ukraine doesn't get killed by Putin. I want large corporations to pay their fair share of taxes. I want the European elections to really determine what kind of politics are done in Europe. I want that to determine, how is the EU government composed. And again, all this requires treaty change. A convention is not an aim in itself. It's the kind of things that we want to change, that we need to talk about. The other thing I want to say, though, is we cannot only talk about European issues in European elections. Because actually, at least as important, some would say more important, are all those national elections that take place all the time. Spain was already mentioned. We have possibly the most consequential election for the EU before the European election will be the election in Poland. And what way it goes there. When we had the national election in Germany, there were 3 TV debates among the main candidates. There was not one question on what will you do in the EU. And these are now the people, for those 4 years that they sit in government, that hold the most. Germany has the most votes in council. 18.2% of the vote share in council goes to the German government, and they didn't have to say, so what is it what you're going to do for the next 4 years when voting in council? We have general ideas, and the party have programs, but I think this is where we need to go as well and nail them down. And we still have an issue. Don't know how that works in every country, but the country I know best, and in Germany, the debate there, in the European elections, all, from the conservatives, social democrats, liberals, and us, everyone runs on a campaign. Look, we want the European Parliament to have the right of initiative. We want, to abolish the veto in lots of things. Yet, before this current government came into power, the previous 16 years of Angela Merkel, while those candidates from the conservatives in every European election ran on, right of initiative for the European Parliament, did the government ever do anything on it or support those kind of reform debates when they happen in the council? No. And I think that happens in other member states too. So we need to make sure that parties run on the same programs, whether they run in a national, local, or European elections, and that we also hold them account for their European politics when it's time to vote national parliaments and national governments for this to work.
Joanna.
Yes, I think I couldn't agree more with your last point. We have to talk about Europe at all levels, and that starts from the local level, up to the European. And I think when to come back to your question, of course we have to run with this message of abolishing the veto, of changing the treaties, but these are the methods, and there are other topics that voters might actually be more interested in. For example, climate change. How do we tackle climate change? And I think it is important to have this in your package and really act on it as well. So speaking again about management expectations, yes, you can run saying, okay, if you vote for us, we're gonna make sure that in 5 years' time the EU is a country. But is that realistic, right? You have to make sure that the way also you sell your message makes the voter understand that it is not only to one party or 2 parties, but to actually the whole of the European Parliament, of the Commission, of the member states, to then really follow up. And then again, this is really where it comes in, that we have to talk about it in the media. We have to talk about it outside of electoral cycles. And whether we should be moderate or whether we should have an easy message or complex, I think we need both, obviously. We need to communicate the big ideas in simple words to reach as many people as possible. Again, we have to think about the person who has never heard about the EU despite being an EU citizen, to reaching the fonctionnaire that is working at the Commission for the last 30 years. So I think it's what is really, in my opinion, important is that when we tailor our messages, we have to make sure that they reach all Europeans, and that it's not because you never been to Brussels or you never maybe voted in a European election before that your views don't matter, and that you can still have an impact on what's happening in the EU. So hence, again, I mean, all hats down for a conference on the future of Europe, but how can we make sure that the next time we reach those people who don't even know about it? But definitely run on it, and this is also what is part of Volt's program for 2024.
Yes, Jan.
If I may complement the message of Johanna. It is also important to pass the message to people, either in the current form of the EU or in the future form of a European federation, that federalism is not about centralizing everything in Brussels. It's not about deciding everything under one structure. Federalism is about attributing the right competencies to the right level. So the message that we need to pass to people, and I think they started realizing it even subconsciously in the last 3 years, is that some big things like the Russian aggression in Ukraine, or like the pandemic, or like the big trade wars, cannot be fought at national level. People have already digested the message, and I also refer to the idea of not being too divisive in our approaches. Even in the UK, they have digested the message that challenges like Putin or Trump or climate crisis or pandemic can only be addressed at a high international level. And this can be the level of a federation. Of course, other issues that have to do with our local national identity can much be better addressed at national level, and there we keep the competencies. The UK, if it was a member of a European federation, could still have the king or the queen as ceremonial leader of the country. No problem with this. The national flags, the representation on Eurovision Song Contest, national football teams, everything will remain British or Greek or Bulgarian or German. And of course, further down, several competencies can be Scottish as well. So, yes. I'm just complementing the message of Johanna that if we reach out to the people, we should also keep in mind to tell them that the right thing needs to be addressed at the right order, in the right place, and of course the right level.
Yeah. Yes, please.
Yes, hello, I'm Emmanuel. I'm also a member of Alliance for Europe. But it's as a French teacher I'm addressing to you, and I think, to be honest, usually I'm very optimistic, but I must tell you that the Conference for the Future of Europe was very, very disappointing, really. Nobody in France around me was aware of the conference, and when I tried to speak to them about that, so Brussels was buzzing, very excited about the conference, but the people outside Brussels, didn't hear nothing. Well, didn't hear anything. Sorry, and I think Omri and Johanna, you told us how to reach people. It's very, very important to reach now the people in the south of France, in a small village, in rural area, because if it's still in Brussels, it will be in Brussels, and we could dream about a European Federation, but no one French people will vote for a European Federation today, because for 1 year now, they're struggling with things very important, and so Brussels is more seen as the enemy. And we will face a very difficult time. So next year, I'm sure I will be very involved to the European election to try to reach people to vote and to advocate for Europe. But they will tell me what's about my life and Brussels, you know. So we will have to start from now, because the conference didn't do anything to reach the people. I'm sorry. I will do
Yeah.
my best.
Thank you for this statement. I will add something before about what you just said. It's a question more general. Will be the federalism an answer to Euroscepticism? Is it an answer? I mean, yeah. Yeah.
Sure. So, I think how we get to the nuts and bolts of actually running these kinds of campaigns, really engaging people, is a key question. I think that there was a lot of learning done in the 2019 elections with a lot of coalition building and this feeling of urgency. Also, this is when Alliance for Europe was formed. There was a lot of other partnerships and coalitions that were built. We are now working to, again, bring together the ecosystem around these kinds of issues, creating the sense of urgency of hey, we need to start now, and we have been doing that for since the beginning of the year. I think there is a lot of response. I think there is, at least in the networks that we operate in, a sense that the 2024 is going to be an important year. There are people also talking across the Atlantic about what we can learn in terms of campaign tactics and tools and so on. We have spent a lot of time developing infrastructure, developing capacities that we can use, and also experimenting, testing. How can we reach certain audiences, let's say in rural Germany, in rural Poland, or what can we learn from all of those things? And I think that indeed Poland in October is going to be absolutely crucial for the future of Europe overall. It's something that we need to really keep an eye on and also work with partners there. Alliance for Europe, we're now running a project of civil society coordination in support of Ukrainian refugees and host communities in the border region of Poland, and also working with partners to see how we can tackle foreign information manipulation, so just disinformation threats, and applying cybersecurity tools, for example, to that. So you can get quite granular on these issues, but it's the practice that counts at the end of the day, and we just need to make sure that we're kind of riding the wave to actually make a difference. And then I think, is federalism an answer? If you explain it right, as in if you actually present it as an alternative that can solve people's problems, so that people can feel it. And I think that we can look back into European history. The rise of nation states in Europe was basically an act of liberalism against empires. So Italy coming together, Germany coming together, the whole kind of spring of the people in 1848, that was essentially liberals saying, we have an identity, we have economic interests, we have things we want to do together, and we don't care about the Habsburg Empire or the old French Empire or this or that, And I think here we also have, we have to find that same emotion, and we have sort of a historic progression of liberals crowding out conservatives and getting some interest there. Then social democrats came up and sort of crowded out liberals to get something for working class people that were disenfranchised. Suffragists came along, the environmental movement came along, and now we have more and more of a European political agenda that again is sort of shifting the political spectrum so that we can really see that. And the other political ideas, they don't disappear, they stay there and they evolve, and they're still relevant, but we keep on shifting the agenda upwards. So maybe
Yeah.
Yanis.
Thank you, Yanis.
Um, just to complement what Omri said, it is important that we catch the spirit of our time. Usually there is a political cycle between the pessimistic times where security is wanted by people and the optimistic times where prosperity is wanted by people. Now we are unfortunately in the first phase of the cycle. People feel insecure. If you see all around Europe, they started voting for the right populist parties are on the rise. We have AfD in Germany close to 20%. Vox in Spain is polling high. Meloni is in the government of Italy. Le Pen in France, next year she might thrive in the European Parliament elections. We feel the threat of energy crisis, inflation, Russian aggression. So federalism might send a reassurance message to the people right now that security is put first, and security in all aspects: defense, protection of borders, right management and integration of immigrants, reduction of criminality, reduction of social incohesion, protection of people's wealth from inflation, from energy crisis, all these things. So we should think always through the filter of security right now in this period, and try to pass the message to people that a federal solution will address their security needs much better than nationalistic or local solutions. Of course, it's nice to give a big vision of prosperity and hope to people. It will come, but unfortunately, in this period, people feel more threatened than they feel ambitious about something big. Even artificial intelligence is seen as a security threat for them. So we need to find answers on this.
Yeah, Daniel, do you want to comment on it?
I mean, just to say on what you last said, the shift to the right. I mean, I see the risk, and the numbers indeed are scary in lots of places, but actually, you know, if you look really at what's happening, if you look, for example, what happened in the Italian election, we didn't have a shift to the right. You had a shift within the right, where people basically went from Lega to Meloni. You can still say that's bad, but the overall share of the extreme right in Italy did actually not go up. The thing that really scares me is not so much, you know, I mean, yeah, AfD in Germany is going up a few percent in the polls at the moment. They will go down again. But the scary stuff is when conservatives start going into alliances with the extreme right, when they give them opportunities to govern, when they normalize a post-fascist extreme right agenda. You know, AfD in Germany is not scary as long as the CDU, CSU, the conservatives, you know, hold the line and don't go into coalition agreements with them and put them in power. And that is what we're seeing in some governments. Most clearly in Italy, there's a clear risk that happening in Spain now. We have a tolerance of the government in Sweden. And there is a clear risk that happens after the European elections at the scale of the EU. And I think, you know, that is something that we all, as pro-European Democrats, have to go out there and make this campaign about. You know, put the conservatives on the spot. Are you going into an alliance with the extreme right? And how the hell is that going to work? How can von der Leyen run on a ticket saying, you know, I mean, I don't know if she's openly saying it, but her party leader, Manfred Weber, pretty openly says, I want to bring Meloni into the EPP, or at least go into a power sharing deal with these kind of people. So if that is the model that they want to build the next majority in the European Parliament, but I guess also, you know, I mean, the Commission policy on that, that's not a Europe I want. I think that will mean probably the end of the Green Deal as we've been building it over the last few years. Already the situation of human rights at our external borders, we all know what that's like. That's not going to get any better. So I think that is also what this campaign is about. And, I think we have seen in the past that that can be a motivation for people going to the ballot. And maybe to come back to Brexit as a, giving some hope on some aspects. In 2016, just after the referendum, there were lots of crazies in Europe that were saying, Le Pen in France, Frexit next, Geert Wilders in the Netherlands, Nexit next, and Salvini in Italy, taking Italy out of the Union. And except for the AfD in Germany, none of them say that anymore today. So that makes them, you could say, even more dangerous because they, have gone a bit more mainstream on some aspects. But the most anti-European aspects, if you want, out of most of the extreme right-wing parties, has gone out. So at least we're no longer, there's no longer a threat of Italy leaving or the Netherlands leaving. Because I think, what the Brexiteers have done has been so stupid that really everyone by now has understood that that was a stupid thing to do.
If I could just say one
Yeah.
quick
Yes,
thing.
please. Yes.
You're right. What happened to us in Britain did send a strong message and has deterred other people. But I think one of the lessons we've learned is that there is a big communications problem, and we haven't collectively, I think, learned to handle it yet. The far right, whether it's from the US or whatever, are infiltrating our discourse. And until we absolutely have the analysis, we know who's funding these people, what these groups are, what they're saying, how they are researching behavioral science to manipulate people, and then figure out our own strategic communications and how we would respond to these enemy narratives. Unless we are 100% sure of those and know how to handle it now, we should be really careful because, whatever you might say about federation, you might be absolutely right. It's the right answer to deal with big problems of the day. But they're going to say all sorts of stuff about what that means. Some big government in Brussels run by the Jews or something. Who knows? I'm telling you, I'm Jewish, so I can say that.
They are everywhere.
But GB News in the UK, GB News, a far right, pretending to be mainstream and just listening to the left behind, actually a far right outlet, just got £120 million from Legatum and I don't know who. Who are these shadowy people? What are their agendas? What are they trying to do to our countries? And until we know it and that we make sure the populations know what's happening to them, we've got to be super careful, and that's the work I really care about. But you're right that the centre-right groups should forbid these guys from joining them. That's absolutely the right policy.
Yes, please.
To add also on that thing about EPP,
You want to present yourself?
Albert from Bob.
Okay, thanks.
The numbers from Bloom today from the research about climate and environment. They researched, nobody said no, okay, good. They look at all the big reforms in climate environment from last year in Europe. And of course, the Greens and EFA scored 19.2 on 20. And the baddest one was 3.3 on 20 from the EPP. It's even less than the extreme right wing. So yeah, I thought it was worse. It's problematic that the baddest score on everything what's about climate was from the EPP fraction.
Yeah.
No question. Just
It was mostly a comment, but yeah.
Yes, I mean, I think here we are opening another can of worms, and it is also something that we will have to talk about also in a more, elaborate discussion, I think. But I mean, you're absolutely right. Unfortunately, politics is money. So I think, especially coming from a smaller party, I do see the reality of, little to no funding, according if you're, elected or not, but also really the fact of sometimes always being the David against the Goliath. And I could not agree more, and I thank you for raising that point. We have to check, where does the money come from? Follow the money. This is something that, experts are saying as well, but why isn't happening? I mean, it is dangerous as well. And for sure, things are not crystal clear, things are shady, but there is really this need for a front, let's say, of engaged citizen to combat that. And I think I dream of a Europe of engagement. I want people to stand up, not just vote, but do more. Participate in this political conference. Become a member of a political party, whatever. You know, go to one, then change, become member of different parties, but have a sense of what it actually means to, you know, prepare those elections as well. Because at the end of the day, I think it's important also to look at the perspective of the preparation of the campaign for the 2024 elections. We often think about, okay, how is the voter gonna, you know, turn up on the day, so in Belgium, the 9th of June 2024. But what is all the process behind, and how can we make sure that people are involved before they get to vote? And I think to come back to your point also about the fact, you know, EPP scored 3.3%. I saw also this graphic. What we have to watch out for is the politics of interest. I think, you know, we have to make sure that politics is about values, about really policies, and not economic interests. And how do we manage that? You know, again, I think one of the key learnings I've taken from my 1.5 year engagement in a political party is we need more people. We need more people to do, not just speak, but to do. And I think this is a call really to every European or every citizen of the European Union to feel also a little bit responsible of what will happen in 2024. And this is my dream.
Thank you. Does anyone else has a question? Yes, please.
Yeah, as you know, there's an increase of calls for a pause in reforms for your environmental matters from Macron, from our own Prime Minister in Belgium, and others. And also you have a rise of parties that are extremely opposed to any reforms, like the BBB in the Netherlands. But on the other side, you have very good climate and our environmental matters related conventional citizen conventions that did a lot of good in several countries. Do you think that the Conference on the Future of Europe could have done more on that regard, on citizen participation and decision-making related to environmental matters? And also, do you think like parties like Greens and Volt and other similars should run on like those topics of citizen participation and those decision-making?
And I can imagine you are coming from Volt Belgium. No.
Just
Okay.
interested.
Okay. I mean, you haven't presented yourself, that's why. I mean,
My name is Terence, I'm interested.
okay, thank you so much. Daniel.
So, I mean, the Greens are running on, you know, modernizing, improving democracy. I think, you know, our democracies are not something static. It's something that you always need to keep improving for it to stay alive. Yes, these kind of citizens' assemblies are great. That's why I pushed so much to have them at the European level, and we did. I think at the end of the day, the thing that that held the conference back the most were member states. I mean, basically on the day when we launched the online platform for all citizens across Europe to submit their ideas on how could the future of Europe look like, 14 member states came out and said, well, anything that comes out of this conference, we don't see that as legally binding, and please don't make any proposals for treaty change. So basically what they were saying is, okay, let's have a debate with citizens about the future of Europe, but please do get a lawyer that explains to you if your proposal is actually feasible within the current treaty framework or if it needs treaty change, and then come see us. I mean, that's not exactly how you can have a conversation with citizens or voters, right? That's ludicrous, but that's how member states went about it. And we had pretty much a similar reaction at the end of the conference. You know, when formally speaking, I mean, I was a member of the executive board of the conference where we wrote the final summary of all those recommendations that came out of hundreds of hours of discussion, citizens, civil society, members from every parliament on this continent, inside the European Union, and you know, everyone sort of signed off on the recommendations, and then immediately after, governments come out and say, yeah, but not for us, and that to some degree is voter fraud, I'd say. And we need to hold them accountable for that. They can't do that. They can't invite, such a broad representation of Europeans and say, we have this debate for a year. And then when the outcome is on the table, they say, yeah, and now we're not going to do anything about it. And at least the European Parliament and the cross-party has been very clear that we're not aiming for letting them get away with it, but it's for all of us to make that happen. It's for all of us to go to our respective national governments and say, so what are you consented to this as well? Your minister was in this debate as well, and if he wasn't, why wasn't he? Everyone was invited, but some participated sort of intermittently, to put it mildly. Why is that? Why aren't they going into that debate? And if already they didn't bother to show up, why aren't they doing the results anyways that everyone else agreed on while they weren't there? That's our job. That's our job at the ballot box. That's our job, during public discourse and whenever we get the chance to talk to them. I think that's the mechanism. And yeah, I agree that if we don't do anything about those recommendations, there's a chance to alienate people more. We have seen that some of these citizens' assemblies have worked very well, and I would actually say that the Irish model, where from the outset they actually knew there's going to be a referendum at the end and were preparing the possible answers to that referendum, is probably the best working model, because then everyone from the outset knows this is serious. This is not just a nice discussion we're having, but it's gonna lead to something. We didn't manage that, but I was repeatedly sort of in this board before the decision: do I now kill the entire process and we're not even gonna have a debate on this in years to come, or do I accept that the conference is gonna be worse than what I wanted it to be, but at least we're getting something? That's repeatedly the decision we were put in front, and it's not an easy one. I think at the end of the day, it was still better to have it than not to have it.
Thank you so much, Daniel. It's already 8. I will give you 2 minutes to each one of you to highlight it, what are lessons taken from this conversation, and we will stop here. It's quite hot already. We spent more than 1 hour. Yeah, I'm already in the European elections, yeah. 1 hour talking about politics. Let's start with you, Omri. 2 minutes to highlight it, summarize these lessons to take in.
Yeah, so just maybe a quick response there at the end. I wanted to come back to Sandra's point about the fact that we need to be careful about who are these shady interests and how are they manipulating people and so on. I agree with you, and no matter how much we know, we will need to continue to be careful, but we can't stand still, because standing still is losing. So we have to get ahead of these people. We need to know more, expose them and neutralize them, and essentially set a narrative, but we just don't have the luxury of standing still. So I think a lot of this, also with the question about this narrative about climate, is about storytelling. It's about how can we inspire in people an emotional connection, as we said, and also a vision of the future that they care about. So if you just tell people, well, climate change is coming, so don't have a steak, don't drive a car, don't fly a plane, stay at home with the lights off, then maybe they're not going to be into that. But then if you tell them, like, no, this is a great new opportunity, you're going to have a great new sustainable car, you're going to have new jobs, a new horizon that's opening up, and instead of being worried that you're going to choke up in smoke, you're going to be able to breathe fresh air in the nice green meadows, then maybe that's a more inspiring story. And I think that if we really pay attention to how we build those stories and how we let people relate, sort of place themselves as the hero of the story, that's maybe how we can get a message across.
Thank you so much. Joanna? 2 minutes.
Yes, so very quickly, I think I see from this discussion, from the questions as well, that we are aligned on the overall objective of fighting for a better Europe, or defending a better Europe. But we're not there yet, and I think what we can be positive about, optimistic, is that we do have the solutions in our hand. We talked about communication, so okay, let's do this. Let's have this conversation with someone who might not be interested in. Just force a little bit the conversation if necessary. I mean, of course, always with consent. But I think we have to continue to be ambitious, and also we have to be proud as well of what we have achieved so far with the European Union. So this is something that we should never forget, that we are here. We have, at least in the border of the European Union, we have peace, and this is what it is all about. But how can we make sure that these ideals, this peace also will be reinstored also at the borders of our union and beyond our union. So I think let's stay positive, but let's get engaged as well. Huh? Let's go into the field and act all together, really. I mean, it sounds cheesy, but there's nothing more right, I think, in having, again, these conversations and, be inspired and inspire others.
Thank you, Joanna. Yanis, do you want to comment first?
Just to carry from what Johanna said, politics is money, but it's also people. So I would like to appeal to myself, also to you personally, each one of you, to start passing your messages to your cycle. You can still influence yourself, people, to adopt a more ambitious agenda. I will not share the pessimism that misinformation will prevail. I'm much more optimistic. Misinformation, usually people are not that stupid. At the end of the day, they understand what is the bogus theory. No, in the, okay. True, but then you also have your own personal responsibility, as I do, to share through our social networks, through our social media, to stick to the message, be rational, be also ambitious, and encourage the people. Last word from me actually will be a question to Mr. Freund, also to allow him also to close himself the discussion altogether. What has happened actually to this German coalition agreement of the German government to go for a European federal state? Is this proclamation still alive? Just to help you, it's in page 113. I memorized it. Is it just a remote vision, or do you really, of course you're not member of the government, you're a representative of the people, but what do you know about your party? Do you really, let's say, work realistically on this?
Yeah, I think so. The German government in the council has been quite active on these questions. There is a German-French initiative. They have put together an expert group of civil society representatives, think tankers, academics, to start thinking about how concretely we can do some of those things. Obviously, we do that in the parliament as well, but I think it's good if on all sides we work on this. And actually, there is now a group of 10 member states, I think, in the council, sort of the more reform-minded governments, and Germany was quite instrumental in setting that up. So yes, I know, I mean, for me, since we are in government in Germany, my collaboration with the German government has greatly improved. That I now have direct access daily. Whenever I want, I send text messages to our Europe minister and so on. So there's a whole different kind of working culture now in the German government. It still doesn't mean that everything is done. We are, one of 3 coalition partners, and even if the Social Democrats on paper support all this, now that we have people on the inside of the government, to know what the Chancellor is doing, this all needs still more pressure. Some of you might have seen the speech he gave in Prague. Well, and it's sometimes frustrating to see as well. Officially they are for transnational lists, and very little happens. If you start the debate on reforming the European electoral law with "we want more seats for Germany" is a great conversation starter with everyone else. but yes, I think at the end of the day, the German government is sincere, and definitely us Greens are sincere in this and working on that. So I can just close with European elections are coming up. Vote Green. then we get more of this federalism.
This is, you saw the power having a micro in your hand. Huh? Thank you. Thank you so much, all of you. I may only say that we need a coherent vision, not only values, but actions as well. And thank you so much for being with us. And yeah, thanks a lot.